Hi there, I'm CBS 11's Doug Dunbar. We wanted to take a couple of minutes of your time to speak about the 88th Texas legislative session. It is going to be a busy one. We welcome in our political insider, Jack Fink, who the knower of all, the keeper of all.
I wish that were the case.
Well, when it comes to the information about what's going to be happening in the legislative session. So 88th session, over 1,600 bills filed already. Could be more, obviously, as we kind of go through the process. But for those who have keen interest in everything that's going to be happening there, whether it's just one item or multiple items that are personal to them, let's do a little deep dive on a lot of the things that we do know and things that concern you and maybe even concern you in the home you're living in, because property tax, we know, is one of those at the very top of the list that will be up for consideration on many different levels. Talk to us about what you know that's been filed and kind of where we stand with the fight on property tax.
Well, this is, certainly every start of the legislative session is a big deal because the Texas legislature only meets every other year. And so property tax relief is something that everybody, you at home, if you own a house, you feel it in your wallet because of the property, taxes, property values rising, et cetera. And so Governor Abbott made it a very big part of his campaign issue. There have been some bills that have been filed already, but it doesn't mean anything until the governor and the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House weigh in on how they want all this to go. They say they leave it up to the legislators, but they really guide the legislature. And the lieutenant governor has already come out and said, yes, he would like to do property tax relief, but he already cautioned that that the state cannot do as much as Governor Abbott said, at least not at this point, because there's only a limit of so much that the Texas legislature can spend. They can only increase spending as it relates to population growth and inflation, and that's where it's capped. And so to do a very large property tax reduction, the governor wanted to take half the surplus, which was about $27 billion projected last summer, and he wanted to take half of that, about $13.5 billion, and lower people's property taxes. The lieutenant governor has already said, I don't think we can do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, that'd be a wonderful gift for everybody.
Right.
But can you?
Well, that's going to have to be ironed out because the lieutenant governor said they're going to have to get creative down in Austin. And so that's one thing we're going to be watching, Doug, is to see how they come up with property tax relief. The other thing that we're going to be watching is the latest projection on how much surplus the state is going to have, not only at the end of this year's budget, but at the end of the next two-year budget. Keep in mind, Texas has a two-year budget, so they budget out 2 years, which is a long time. And so I think this is going to be one of the interesting things is how much money could we have more than $27 billion?
Right.
And if so, what does that mean for the legislative process? Of all the 1,600 bills that you mentioned, most of them don't get passed. And there's only one bill that's required to get passed by the Texas Constitution, and that's the budget.
There you go. So that's budget, that's property tax, something we know that has been on your minds. It's on ours as well. Lots of us are parents, and that is our kids.
Yeah.
Let's talk about public education, and there's multiple facets that we can go because a lot of different things. We're talking about Uvalde, we're talking about learning loss during COVID and things of that nature, and bills filed reflecting on those individual situations and others. So where do we stand as a whole on public education? What's the thrust of what is trying to be done in the legislative session with public education?
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, there's learning loss that everybody knows was a real issue. And so the legislature, you can expect the legislature is going to deal with that, both Republicans and Democrats. And then when you talk about teachers, keeping teachers, it's a huge problem in the state of Texas and really across the country. How is the state legislature going to address this? The lieutenant governor has said that he wants to give more money for teachers, so that's something I look to see the lawmakers passing, to provide additional money for school districts to pay more to attract teachers and to keep teachers. And then, of course, one of the biggest stories that we had last year, Uvalde, and school security. And, we did that special, Doug, and we spoke to lawmakers about what it is that they want done. And one of the things that we discovered was that some of the laws that were passed in the prior sessions to address school security had no teeth. And so that's one of the things that I think is going to be interesting to see if does the legislature really hold the state educational system, school districts accountable for if there's laws that are passed, are they enforced? And I think that's one of the big things that we're going to be watching for this session. Also, giving money to school districts so that they can make security improvements. We saw doors not locked in Uvalde, doors that didn't work. And so I think this is a very big issue, something that parents want, educators want, lawmakers want, and so I think we're going to see what they come up with.
Can I ask you about one that's maybe intertwined in all of this as well, because that's the student and the administration side of a bad situation like a Uvalde. There's also so much discussion now, mental health, the shooter in that situation, but mental health as a whole is on the table today like we've never really seen before. What do you know about that as far as in the legislative session?
Lawmakers, every lawmaker I spoke to about this knows that they have got to do more on mental health spending for students and for the public in general. And so I expect there to be an increase, especially for schools this session. The legislature passed funding increases. The problem that we discovered here at CBS 11 was that not every school district really took advantage of this. Some of them didn't want it. And so I think this is going to be an issue this time around, where lawmakers are going to want to make sure that not only is the funding there for all these school districts, but funding is there to help the school districts find the professionals to fill these jobs, because that's the other problem we saw during the pandemic. Nobody wanted to do this.
Right. Well, but also the number of available professionals as well, right?
That's exactly right.
That's a huge issue, because it's a well that is now so deep in need. And a lot of talk is that we just don't have the resources and the bodies on the professional side to bring in, even if we had unlimited money.
Right. Well, part of the reason is there's no, the salaries aren't there.
Right.
And so the state, the experts know that they have got to add money to this, and the lawmakers do too, and they want to. No one I spoke with opposes that. They all know this is a problem that they need to address.
Right. Moving on, let's talk about the elephant in the room in the state of Texas. And if you were here in February of 2021, you'd know what we're talking about. That is the grid, electricity, knock on pleather, or whatever this chair is made of. We've skated through this winter, and we've done so okay. We can't, one real cold, super cold snap. But the reality is we, the layman, you watching wherever you are right now, and Jack and I sitting in a studio, we don't truly know if the grid is good to go. We can only go by what we're told. So what's being done there to help ensure that we don't experience something again like we did in 21?
Well, I think this session, and the discussion has already started, it's actually been ongoing since 2021. And so the last session, the legislature, and this of course happened while the big storm and the power outages happened during the session. And so there was immediate action done, laws that were passed. And so what the state did was they made improvements to the grid that they could make at the time, which was, we talked a lot about weatherization and making sure that all the places that generate electricity, the plants, et cetera, are weatherized, and did a better job of that, because the state didn't do that a decade earlier after the last time we went through this. So the state did what it could in a very short period of time to beef up enforcement, make sure that power plants and their operators were doing a better job winterizing their facilities so that they could survive a really severe winter storm. But the next part of this is the long term, because let's be honest, Doug, in Texas, everybody enjoyed cheap electricity. That's how the market was designed. But what the state learned in 2021 is that cheap electricity is not necessarily reliable electricity. And so now part of the discussion is with ERCOT, which provides most of the electricity or oversees the electricity market here in Texas, and the Public Utility Commission, which oversees ERCOT, they are in the process of redesigning, trying to figure out how to redesign the Texas electricity market so that we don't have a 2021 winter storm cause massive power outages again. And so that's a long-term issue. They've already made proposals, ERCOT and the PUC. Some lawmakers have already come out against it. And so there's going to have to be a lot of frank discussions and conversations about how to fix this for the long term.
All right, when we talk frank discussions, border security rises right to the very top. You may be passionate about it. A lot of people in the legislature are. Across this country, people are passionate about it. So as we stand heading into the session, Governor Greg Abbott has done what he's done, Operation Lone Star. He's kind of, taken the bull by the horns, if you will, and he's kind of doing his own thing to a large degree as much as he can. He's been highly critical of President Biden. President Biden finally making his first ever trip to the southern border as he sits in the office as president. What do you see coming in the legislative session with border security and possible outcomes?
Well, I think it's important to note, Doug, that what we saw previously, the legislature, they would spend about $1 billion, over a 2-year period on securing the border. That was a lot of money. Now, during this past couple of years, the state has ramped spending up. It's now $4 billion. And so, yes, the governor has led a lot of this operation, but at the same time, he's needed legislative approval just from the top, leadership of the state to make $4 billion. Now, the real test is this $4 billion going to become permanent? And I think in this session, it is going to become permanent, at least until we see what the federal government does. But I don't see any changes. I think the state is still going to spend about $4 billion going forward to address the issues of the border.
Let's talk abortion for a moment, something clearly highly politicized, and one can argue that it has shaped some elections in this country, obviously. As we stand in Texas right now, the new law is in place, highly restrictive, but there are pushes in this legislative session to at least get some exceptions to that. What is on the table that you know of?
Well, the Democrats obviously want to ease, they don't want the rule now that bans most abortions in Texas. The Democrats are not in power to change that. They don't have the power in the legislature to do that. So one of the interesting things is before the election, one of the key Republican senators, Robert Nichols, said that he was comfortable with the idea of having an exception for rape. Because remember, right now, the only exception on abortion is to save the mother's life. And so he said that he would like to have an exception. He would consider having an exception for rape. He was sharply criticized for that by many in the pro-life community. And so I asked the lieutenant governor when he was campaigning about this, and he said all he would say is there are going to be a lot of conversations. I go back to my conversation with the former Speaker of the Texas House, Dennis Bonnen, on election night, and I asked him about this very issue. Does he see Republicans easing up and providing more exceptions? And he said he does not. The other question that I see coming up, Doug, are a couple things. Are there going to be restrictions on businesses who pay for their employees to travel out of state to get an abortion?
Much talk about that.
There's a lot of talk about that. The Supreme Court, though, when the justices made their rulings about abortion and they overturned Roe v. Wade, there was discussion about this very issue and concern by more than one of the justices, if I remember correctly, that would violate interstate commerce. So we'll see, what comes up on that issue. The other thing is, will there be restrictions, more enforcement on medication abortion? That's something I think that'll be interesting to see. One issue that I think Republicans and Democrats do agree on this coming session, and that is providing more money to make sure that mothers before and after they give birth are doing well. That I think we're going to see more of that for sure.
So here in North Texas, I've lived here almost 19 years, And so this would be my 9th legislative session, roughly. Gambling, casino possibilities have come up, I think, in almost every legislative session that I can recall. You probably have a much better memory than I do. But it's like there's talk, generation, bills are filed, discussion, and we'll see in 2 years.
Doesn't go anywhere.
I mean, that's kind of the cycle. Do you see the same thing happening again?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see, because when you talk about gambling in this session, we could be very well talking about two different types of gambling. One, sports gambling. It's not legal in Texas, so you got FanDuel and all the others. And former Governor Rick Perry, Republican, used to oppose sports gambling. Now he's come out and supported it. And so we'll see. I'm waiting to see if a bill is actually filed that would enable, that will be filed and that will ultimately be passed. I'm not so sure that the Republicans are going to support that. We'll have to wait and see. The other part is casino gambling, and we've seen the Sands Corporation try last session. It didn't go anywhere. They're going to try again. And Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, has come out and said he would support that and be willing to go in with a casino. And there would only be, I've talked to the Sands people about this months ago, their proposal would only be to open, various casinos in each area of the state, Dallas-Fort Worth area, Houston area, very nice casinos, resorts. So they say the casino would be a very small portion of this whole resort area under their proposal.
Square footage or money?
Well,
that's very arguable, obviously.
Yeah,
right.
Well, the other thing is, to make that happen, there would need to be a change in the Texas Constitution. So this is not an easy process. So in order to make a change in the Texas Constitution, two things have to happen. First, the legislature has to approve that, and then it has to go to a vote to everybody here in Texas. If that happens, guess how many TV ads you're going to be seeing?
You will think it's political season again.
Yes,
without,
for sure.
Without question.
For sure.
Before we let you go, great discussion, by the way. Before we let you go, though, something that some of you may recall, some of you may, if you're new to Texas, you may not have paid attention to something that unfolded here, but it all circles back to Democrat committee chairs. An event of late may see a little bit of a change in strategy there. Tell us about that.
Well, one of the things that we know is Republicans this time around are calling for the House Speaker to eliminate Democratic committee chairs. Right now, a lot of people may not realize that in Texas, in the House, there are Democratic committee chairs. The Republicans have been in control for a very long time, and so very few states operate like this. If you go back to the 2021 session and Democrats broke quorum and they left, they went to Washington, D.C. because of an election integrity bill that they disagreed with, a lot of Republicans were very angry about that, and they said, wait a minute, they get to go, how are they going to be penalized? Why should they have committee chairs? Why should the Democrats be committee chairs in the House? And so the Republicans are bringing this up again. They're really making a case. It's a legislative priority for the Texas GOP. So we'll see what happens. This may be ironed out on the first day of the legislature. So we shall see.
A lot to look forward to and a lot for us to report on for all of you. Jack, thank you for the insights as always, my friend.
Yep, nice being here.
Here we go, the
88th
session for the Texas legislature.